Hi everybody. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. It's an absolute privilege to be back at the big gathering and to be invited by Scottish Communities for Health and Wellbeing to talk about work that we think's really exciting at a time when we can actually speak about some findings and share some of those findings with you before they're even published. So this is quite hot off the press. I am the director of the UNIS Centre for Social Business and Health at Glasgow Caledonian, and I lead this Common Health Assets research project. I'm a researcher myself. The research project is about how community-led organisations impact on health and well-being in disadvantaged areas in the UK. So we're working with communities in Scotland, in England and in Northern Ireland. And by disadvantaged, we mean those communities that score badly on those measures of multiple deprivation. So they are often underserved, probably higher in poverty, lower in health outcomes. And before I go any further, I just want to acknowledge an absolutely brilliant team of people and say one or two things about that team, as well as colleagues at Glasgow Caledonian, and Jack Rendell's in the room here. Jack, give a wave. The main researcher for the whole of Scotland, I would say, on common health assets. We've been working with university researchers, but also with community leaders and community experts and partners. So some community organisations and some of the Scottish ones are in the room today, and some community networks and community leads in working with networks like the Health Creation Alliance or the Scottish Communities for Health and Wellbeing. So it's an interdisciplinary team with a range of important expertise, and we're funded by the National Institute for Health Research. And that's how big and beautiful the team is. And those are the logos of the 14 organisations that without whom, partnering with whom, we wouldn't have been able to do the Common Health Assets project. I can't name everybody, I haven't got time. I want to move on, but I do want to say how fantastic it's been working with these groups. So this is what I'd like to cover today. I'm going to start just by setting the scene. So knowing that there's some people who are actually involved in the research, apologies, this will be really familiar ground to you. But for those of you who aren't, I want to just tell you a little bit about what were the questions we were trying to answer. What design did we, how did we design the research to do that? What we mean by community-led organisations, and a little bit about the lived experience panel, which you'll hear more about in the workshops later on today. So once we've done that background stuff and you know what we're trying to do, I'll talk a bit about what we call programme theories. I'll try and avoid jargon. Programme theories are just how you think it works. Okay, so we'll talk a bit about that and what we've done to bring together lots of different types of data against those theories to show if it worked in the way we thought it would, basically. And then we're going to dive into some detail the results of our longitudinal survey, because I think there's some really exciting findings there. Bit of a trigger warning about graphs. I know not everybody likes seeing numbers and graphs, and there's lots of really brilliant statistics in here, not done by me, that I'll talk through. If you don't like looking at graphs and lines, I'll just give you the headlines anyway. So don't worry, I'll be telling you what I think I see in those graphs, and you can just focus on me if that helps. And then I'll leave us with some discussion points, hoping that we can pick up on those during the day in our conversations with each other and in our workshops later on. So that's kind of the next half an hour. And let's start with the research questions and really focusing on the first one, which is, do community organisations impact on health and well-being? And not just does it work, but how? So by what mechanisms? How do people experience different outcomes? And how do their own contexts and characteristics impact on their outcomes? So we don't all respond in the same way to the same things. And our research is partly trying to uncover what different patterns we can see for different people. I won't talk much about these two. We did have research questions about scalability and sustainability of community organisations. They're really important too. Please come and find me if you want to hear more on those pieces. I can't cover everything at once, but we do have packages of work on that too. So what do I mean when I say community-led organisations? I know there's lots and lots of terms for organisations in the voluntary community and social enterprise sector. And I think it's important just to explain when I'm saying CLOs throughout this presentation, what I mean. So these are all different organisations that do different things, but they have in common that they are place-based. So these are organisations in communities, usually with physical space, usually a community hub, that they're community owned and led. They're sometimes called community anchors. There's different terms and languages and sort of traditions, I think, here. And often there'll be healthy living centres, or will have been healthy living centres. All of our organisations focus on different things and do different things because they serve different communities. But we are able to conceptualize them, or we're able to talk about them as one thing because they do what they do in a similar way with a similar set of principles, which you might recognize as being an assets-based approach, or you might use other terms to describe. But it means being working or doing with rather than doing to. It means responding to local needs, talent, skills, knowledge, and building and developing from there. So although some of these organisations are concentrated on, say, an older population, or they're interested in theatre, particularly, for example, they're doing that with a common set of approaches. The activities vary. This is by no means exhaustive. There's all sorts of exciting things going on within the organisations, and I suppose you'll know that already, being experts in how to do community development and community-led health. So we've got physical and outdoor activities, we've got kind of work-based activities, creative arts, theatre, radio, and we've got things which are more focused directly on health as well. So this is the study design. There's a lot on this slide, so I'm just going to point out a few things here. At the top, you can see the overall question, which is how do community-led organisations impact on health and well-being? And every circle on the slide is a different small component of work with a little sub-team around it and a different set of methods. On the right-hand side are all the different ways that we're wanting to communicate this research. So some of that will be through peer-reviewed journal articles in academic journals, but we'll also want to speak to, and are speaking to, people who are developing policy and people who are working and practicing in these communities. So lots of different ways, including videos and social media. Right through the middle, where it says phase 1 and phase 2, is the piece that sort of binds it all together. In phase 1, we set about trying to find out what's already known. So it's not a blank sheet of paper. There are people working in the sector already, and you are designing things to do with people, and you're designing things with people for good reasons, because you expect that they're going to have certain impacts. So we gather together from our stakeholders and experts and from the existing literature and policies, what do we know? And we came up with a set of theories about how things work, how might health be generated. Then in phase 2, we say, okay, do those theories stand up to new data? And we generate all sorts of new data, a survey, interviews, a card sort, working with both participants and stakeholders, people who are running organisations and activities. And in phase 2, we bring together all of that new data and ask ourselves, do the theories need to change? And so we'll look at some of the refined theories today, so that we've done that work and we now have theories that have stood up to or have been refined in the face of data. Really important throughout, and I think part of the success of this project has been down to working with a lived experience panel. And there's people from the panel, our Scottish organisations here today. So Ben and Sandra were part of our lived experience panel, and Jenna Mahassan from Glasgow Centre for Population Health were leading that, and I think you'll hear how exciting that was later on. All the way through the research, we are checking in and having discussions with people who understand the topic that we're looking at, and we're asking them, is this the best way of going about it, or can you tell us better ways of conducting the research or interpreting our findings? So that's been important. How am I doing for time? Oh, I'm okay. So to program theories then, I said that program theories are really about how we think things work. They are articulated usually in terms of context, mechanism, and outcome. But the jargon does not matter at all. It's really how do you think it works, what's happening to people, how do they respond to certain activities or certain interventions or programs, and how does that vary across different contexts. So that's program theories. There's books and books written on this, but that is the basic. That's what you need to know about program theories. And I should say Jack, has developed fantastic diagrams to represent program theories. And you sometimes do see different diagrams used. And I'm going to, because there's lots of circles and boxes here, I'm going to talk you through one of the program theories that has been subjected to data and emerged at the other side very slowly so that you're not looking at lots of boxes and circles, but we can build it up from scratch. So there's lots on that slide. Don't worry, I'm going to break it down. This is a program theory that has centered around ideas of purpose, productivity, and connection. And I want us to start by looking at the yellow boxes and the pink boxes. These yellow boxes are what happened. These are the intervention or the activity. You can see it. You know, it's visible to us. It's something people are doing. And we've brought together across our 14 organisations information and data around working, making, and learning. So we've brought those together because we think similar things are happening in those different activities, and participants are responding in similar ways to these. So it's a kind of constellation. There was lots and lots of information, but it falls into patterns, and this was one of the patterns. Working, making, and learning seemed to be doing something similar. So working could be, gardening for people who can't get out of the house, or mending things. We've got creativity, arts, crafts, knitting, painting, making, and we've got more education and skill-based activities. And what we find, and what our theory says, is that we think that leads to, or our participants told us, that leads to sense of or increased confidence and an important sense of purpose. And then the other two things, and these are things with the heavy black outline, these are things that we've been able to measure in our survey, are social connectedness and improved mental well-being. So from those activities to those outcomes. And this is how the theory says it's happening. And so in our discussions and our qualitative data, we find that when people engage in these kinds of activities, there is a response which is a feeling of making a contribution to something, a feeling of being productive, but also there's interaction. So it's in and amongst people. There's something important about having to show up, having somebody expect you, having some structure, some place to go, a discipline even, or a routine that's important, and the skills. So there's the development of skills. And those are the mechanisms that we think lead to these outcomes based on our data. It seems that people who are disconnected from employment might respond in a particular way to this kind of activity, and for some that might lead to employability, and we've got some examples of that happening. It's not for all, this is what works for whom in what circumstances, but we've picked up something there. And in terms of the context that makes this boosted, if you like, that makes this accelerated, the safe, supported environment that we see in almost every one of our community organisations that we work with was important. And the ability just to take your time, to start with something small before you go to the next thing was also important. And people who are low in confidence, who find a way in through this, seem to benefit particularly. So that's a big, complicated program theory broken down into its pieces. So you can sort of follow the context, the mechanisms, and the outcomes. In the survey, I'm going to come back to the measurement of these two things and talk a bit more about those. We've got 9 of those theories. I'm not going to put up 9 theories in all its circles and boxes, but I did want you to know the kind of space that the theories cover. The first 5 theories are all about that same kind of how do individuals experience change? How is health and well-being improved or changed by, in the first theory, it's about responsibility and choice and taking control of your life, or of making choices with the community organisation, or even being part of the board. So making choices and having responsibility and running the organisation, leading to self-worth, empowerment and confidence. The second is the one I just spoke through about working, making and learning. There's a big piece of work around healthy living that is to do with both exercise, diet, affordable food, a warm place to go, that we have a theory about that's important. The very existence of space and somewhere to go and have community and interact with other people, we have shown as separate from the activities within it. So it has a separate and important contribution to make. It's linked, we think, or we find, to sense of belonging. And it's where people are mixing intergenerationally and across different groups within a community. And finally, volunteering. We didn't have this as an individual theory at the start, but as you'll see in the survey findings, there's some really interesting patterns around volunteering that made us pull it out and talk about it separately. And we've 4 theories about how organisations run, and this responds to those second 2 research questions. I won't talk about that too much, but again, invite you to follow up with me if you're interested. Okay, this is how far I've got. We're going into the survey now. Second trigger warning about the charts and graphs about to come. I'll talk through the design and findings. This is really exciting for researchers when you get findings. It really is. So let's dive in. As part of the project, we wanted to measure outcomes. And we've got a large participant survey drawing on participants from all 14 organisations that we worked with across 12 months. So we followed people for a year. And we took, if you like, we elicited or we measured 4 different things. And these things didn't come out of nowhere. These are important things in the literature that people say they feel impact on. So we've got well-being in terms of capabilities. We measure it with something called the ICE-CAP-A. Doesn't really matter what it's measured, but it's good to know what it's measuring, and it's well-being capabilities. All of these measures are well validated. They've been tested in the literature, and we can be confident in their use. Some of them I think you'll be familiar with. EQ5D is about health-related quality of life. WEMWEBS, I think probably lots of you might have used WEMWEBS. It's to do with mental well-being. And we've got a measure capturing social connectedness. So those are our 4, how did people feel at 4 time points over 12 months against those outcome measures. We also asked them, what did you do? And how often did you do it? And we asked them some questions about themselves, their health, their income, for example. And as I said, we did it over 12 months. So we met and recruited people, and we asked them those questions. Then we met them again a month later, 6 months later, and 12 months later. We had brilliant recruitment and retention. We've got 350 participants recruited, 286 of them still with us at 12 months, which is, I think, absolutely amazing. If you read any research and look at the retention levels, that's very high. And that's down to fantastic researchers working with fantastic community organisations on the ground, in place. At the end, we've got 330 participants we can analyse. And this is just a description of them in terms of basic characteristics. I haven't yet compared that with the overall population of community organisation participants, but it looks to me not surprising. We've got quite a high number with chronic conditions, so chronic illnesses, 65% of the sample, and a third long-term sick, 40% living alone, quite a high number on benefits and a low number employed. So that's what those 330 people look like in terms of their characteristics. And now what did we find? So let's start with our main outcome measure, which is well-being, measured by this ICE-CAP measure. And that's what the ICE-CAP captures, things that are important to a good life, attachment, our relationships with others, the feeling of settled and security, achievement or accomplishment, the feeling of accomplishing something in life, enjoyment, and the ability to be independent. And what do we find? So first graph. So I'm going to talk you through how to read this first, and then I'll tell you what it means. The further up the chart, the better your well-being. As we go across, we're moving across time. So at 12 months, we're at the right-hand side of the chart. The dotted line, so ICECAP well-being is measured 0 to 1. So it's scaled on a 0 to 1. And 1 would be, you're in a good place. You're scoring highly on all of those dimensions. And 0 would be you're at the bottom of all those dimensions. And you can see we're showing from 0.6 up here. And this dotted line here is if you took a UK average, healthy average, that's where they would sit, just below 0.9. So you can see immediately the red line and the blue line are a good bit below that. So the red line is our participants. That's what the 330 people over 12 months reported their well-being to be. And the blue line is a comparison where we assume we take the measures for baseline for new participants and we say, suppose nothing changed. They didn't get better and they didn't get worse. And we're comparing it to that control. And what we find is that we get a statistically significant improvement in well-being over time, but we only see it at 12 months. So it doesn't happen right away. It happens after a period of time. What about health? Health-related quality of life measured on this, a very well-used measure. It captures mobility, self-care, usual activities, pain and discomfort, anxiety and depression. And we read the chart in the same way. The higher up, the better your health-related quality of life, and this is over time. And we don't see a significant impact after 12 months on health-related quality of life. So we can come back to that. I think that's an interesting thing to sort of ponder and maybe talk about in the workshops. What about mental well-being? We do. We've got, again, a statistically significant improvement in people who participate in CLOs, but we only see it at 12 months. So we get better in well-being, we get better in mental well-being, but it takes time. And the last of the 4 outcomes you'll remember was social connectedness. And here we get a statistically significant difference. So people do experience better social connectedness over time, and we see it fast. So we see it at 1 month, and then it maintains over time, that you're able to sustain that social connectedness. So that happens fast. Mental well-being and well-being takes longer. And I suspect that a lot of you will find that quite intuitive, but it's quite nice having data and evidence of something that that chimes with your experience, I think. So that's a summary of what we've just seen. What if we look a bit deeper? Because that is the sort of, you often see in research, did it work or didn't it work? We're interested in how did it work, for whom did it work, what patterns can we see in the data? Now, this is called a forest plot. And there's lots of these, but I think they're difficult to read, and they're difficult to read from far away. I'm only flashing it up to say what wonderful statistics Sarkis Manoukian and the team did. But what I'll do, instead of trying to point at dots and whiskers, as they call them, I'm going to give you the headlines of what we find when we look at the patterns using these forest plots. Again, if anybody has a deep affection for or interested in forest plots, approach me afterwards. We've got loads we can show you. So what are the headlines when we look deeper at the patterns? First of all, new participants, so people that arrive fresh at a community organisation having not been before, tend to be worse off than people who are already engaged with that organisation. But if they go and they keep going, they catch up. And as I said, in terms of their social connectedness, that happens fast. Volunteering has this really clear positive impact on well-being. Volunteering is good for people. Our rural community organisations seem not to have as good outcomes as the others, and those that hire premises also tend not to have such good outcomes as others. And that's something we'd like to explore with you and talk about in the workshops. Not altogether sure we've got some ideas, but how to interpret that. Having a vehicle and owning space tends to lead to better outcomes, at least for the 14 community organisations that we looked at. And again, it would be good to explore that, wouldn't it? Well-being, once your well-being is improved, what we observe in our survey respondents is that tends to then be stable over time. And we think that points to a kind of protective effect of community organisations, so that if you have that sense of belonging and you have a place to go, that you don't spike downwards quite so much, that there's a kind of a steadying or a protective impact. Is everybody still with me? I feel like I'm bombarding you with information and data. In terms of what people did, then one of the things that we found interesting is it matters how often you go. So it matters that you go and you keep going over time if we want to see outcomes. So the more you go, the more you get, especially mental well-being and social connectedness. And that's true of all activities, whether you were gardening or volunteering or knitting. Volunteering has this positive effect on all of our measures, and it goes up and up and up, and then it peaks. And if you do too much, it starts to come down again. And this is one of these lovely graphs where you just go, that's so interesting. We've got data to support something, which actually makes quite a lot of sense. If you overdo it, it might become burdensome, or if you make too much of an ask of people. Being outdoors improves all activities. And the more you're outdoors, the more the activities improves all outcomes. And the more you're outdoors, the more those outcomes improve, which was, again, a really interesting pattern. And then finally, it does matter how often you go and that you stick at it. It seems to apply in different ways to different types of activities. So you'll see some, say, educational activities. The more you go, the more well-being and health-related quality of life you'll see. I like this one. We're finding with arts and crafts and cultural activities that we really see impacts on mental well-being. So it's particularly powerful for mental well-being, those things. Okay, this is the final graph I'm going to show you today. But I think this one's interesting and worth having a look at. Just focusing on the coloured lines. This again is IceCap, so the higher up, the better your well-being. This is over time. And what we've done here is just looked deeper into the data and sort of said, okay, on average people improve in their well-being, but what's happening underneath that? Not everybody is getting the same thing. So we see these patterns. There's 5 different groups that are responding in different ways. I just want to talk through them and perhaps again come back to them in discussion later. That top line, the purple line, is people who start pretty well at the beginning of our survey and continue to be well to the end. And that's about 44% of the sample. So quite a lot of people start well and end well. And as you'll see in a moment, they tend to be more experienced. So these are people that we're capturing who are already involved with the community organisation. This blue line at the bottom, not so good, right? So it starts badly off in terms of well-being and stays pretty badly off. That group, about 7% of the sample, roughly. If you look at the green and the yellow lines, these are people whose well-being is not great at the start, but they're on an upward. So both those lines are going up. And the red is concerning, isn't it? Because a group of people, roughly 12%, are getting worse over time. So hidden behind those big stats or those big findings, there's all sorts of different patterns. And I think it's really interesting to understand more. Who are they? What's happening to those people? And this is what we have found. So just in terms of thinking about the groups that are well off or getting better, those are more likely to be educated people, more likely to be volunteering, and more likely to have a community organisation that's got a vehicle. This vehicle thing coming up again. And in the lower groups, so that blue line and the descending red line, are more likely to be women, to have long-term sickness, to be isolated. These make sense, right? This is intuitive again. Being a new participant, so when people arrive, maybe they're not in great shape, and maybe there is some instability in their outcomes that we're arguing over time would become more stable. And you're more likely to be in those groups in rural settings and with CLOs that don't have their own premises. So these are intriguing findings, I think, that we'd like to discuss more with people in the room who've got expertise and theories about why that might be. I'll just finish on some discussion points that you might want to pick up on other things in the workshops, but here's some ideas for the workshops, and Jack's going to lead us through some thinking on this later on if you're interested. I think once you've got findings, the next thing is sort of a so what. How would we apply those? How does that understanding and new knowledge help or inform what we're doing as communities, as organisations, or as people running activities, as funders of community organisations, and for policymakers? So I'm interested to get at that. What's useful here? What's important for others to know? What could you use? What else do you need to know in order to make it useful? It seems to me that some of the things we found in Common Health Assets after all of this work is actually very intuitive. So that finding on volunteering, it makes perfect sense to me, and all the people I've talked to over the years, I think it would make sense to those people too. But it's actually really useful to have evidence to back up those intuitions and those observations that you make. I think one of the important things coming out of Common Health Assets is that long-term engagement is important, and these place-based hubs existing seems to be important. I think, I don't want to sort of over-interpret, but I think it points to short-term project-based, activity-based funding not being sufficient, that longer-term funding, I think I'm probably speaking to the, what did they call it, singing to the choir? I think longer term, more engaged, more sort of community infrastructure funding seems to be what would be falling out of our observations in Common Health Assets. I think there's interesting things to note about the different impacts of different activities that might be useful to practitioners. I like the fact that mental well-being is picked up around arts, crafts and culture. What is that? That's interesting. And for different groups. So for people with chronic long-term sickness, we probably are not going to be able to cure what they've got, what they're carrying with them in terms of that chronic illness. And I wonder whether that's why we don't see health-related quality of life improving in the same way as we see all our other measures improving. And then finally, I think we need some help interpreting our findings and thinking through the implications of them, particularly around sort of the characteristics of the community organisations, but indeed anything that I've said today that you've got a view on, I'm interested to hear. So this is that we are live in knowledge exchange now, and I'm very happy to share that with you and then engage in discussions with all of you about what it means from your perspective. And that's it from me, from Common Health Assets. I'm good, I'm bang on time.
Yeah, you're great. Thank you.